Hi, welcome back to Business is Personal. I'm Corrie Block. I'm here with my friends Asin and Danish and Gary, and we're going to talk about family business. So talk about taking the elephant in the room and putting it right on the table. We want to talk about family business in the Middle East specifically. We're not going to talk about specific businesses, but considering this fact that McKinsey and was the Gulf Family Council put out a study now that between 1.2 and 1.3 trillion US dollars is going to move from family hands, generation to generation, to millennial owners in the next few years. That is a massive amount of resources. That's just here. That's not even considering offshore assets. So just local assets, $1.2 to $1.3 trillion is going to be moved from one generation to the next in family businesses in the Middle East over the next few years and into millennial hands. So that is the question. How do we steward that kind of resource? But before we start, I would like you to take a minute, please. Introduce yourselves to our audience.
Morning, Corrie. Thank you for having us here this morning. My name is Asin Nurani. I'm the managing partner of a company called RTS Global Partners. We're a leading family advisory firm based here in the Middle East. We have offices here in Dubai and in Nairobi, Kenya. And basically, we work with family businesses in areas of governance, succession, putting in all the structures in place to enable families to transition from one generation to the next. My personal background is I'm born and brought up in Kenya and in Canada. Like Corrie, he's Vancouver, I'm Calgary. We're educated out in Calgary, and I did a stint at Harvard as well. And I ran my own family business in East Africa. I'm from a pedigree of family businesses, from a family that ran 17 industries that collapsed due to family dynamics. And from that experience, we're here to help other family members overcome these challenges and put in the right structures.
Great.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Well, that's thank you for the intro and for the energy. My name is Danish Farhan. I am the CEO of Xische Group. I'll explain what it does in 3 steps. We help governments, global brands, and startups understand themselves, build on their strengths, and tell unforgettable stories. I've been here for 37 years. I've been running these businesses for about 19. I have cracked the code to reverse aging. I am older than I look. Our experience has really been in bridging the gap between businesses and regulatory barriers. So we work very closely with governments in the region and help pave the path for both existing incumbents as well as new businesses to chart a course towards a successful outcome.
Great. Well, excellent to be part of this panel, so thank you very much. My name is Gary Hales. I head up Equiom Fiduciary here in the Middle East. And Equiom is an international professional and financial services organization. We're in 16 countries with about 800 staff in those countries. We've just set up at the beginning of this year in Dubai, having received our license actually last month. And what we do in this region is we work with family offices, ultra high net worth individuals, and focus on asset protection for them. And what's really relevant for this discussion is a key part of what we do is around succession planning. So helping in that transition to ensure that our clients have the right structures in place. So whether that's holding real estate in London in their personal name, in a trust or in a company, we can advise them in the best way to set that structure up so it passes from one generation to the next in an orderly manner and in the way that it's planned to be, so that there are no challenges once the succession is completed. So that's really where we work. And from a personal point of view, I've got 20 plus years in banking and financial services, predominantly here in the Middle East, Europe, and in Africa as well. I grew up in South Africa, so having that international experience and exposure, again, helps me understand the different demands of different family offices around the globe.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. Let's start with the obvious question. I want to know from your experience, because all of us have worked with amazing family companies, what are the biggest challenges that they're facing? Is it succession planning? Is it competency planning? Is it financial planning? What is it? Asin?
So one of the challenges I think most family businesses have is a complete lack of alignment in terms of where they're headed. There's a lack of clarity and vision. And because they don't understand the journey that they're undergoing, the founder who builds the business has a certain vision, but as the successive generations come in, they may have differing visions. And that misalignment spreads this business into all kinds of directions and causes fractures.
That's a really big challenge, actually. It's true, I've seen that too. Danish?
I think I'm going to take a leaf out of your book here. Purpose. I think, so I'm a believer that stories define strategies. And I mean that not from a marketing speak. I do believe that the founder has a story that allows him or her to rally their family, their potential investors, peers, as well as employees to get on this grand journey which may span several decades. But that story doesn't always communicate to the next generation. And you notice in this region, the most successful businesses have peaked in their third generation. And then it starts to become a whole different story. Just statistically talking about the GCC. You know, we're a 47-year-old nation next week, which is worth mentioning because we have 7th-generation businesses in a country that's 47 years old. What does that tell you? These businesses have been around before the Federation was around. So the challenges are incredibly unique.
Yeah, really good. Gary?
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think, you know, from an internal perspective, as you've talked about, it's really about coordination. What is the plan? What is happening in the longer term? They've been around for 3 generations. How is this business still going to be there in the 4th, 5th, and 6th generation? So absolutely there. But then on an external point of view, that, you know, the world is changing. You know, most of the families we deal with are international. So the UK tax rules, for example, are changing constantly. And our role, we find, is about educating family offices and individuals about what's happening in the world, so that when they've got an internal plan of what they're trying to do, how does that fit and how will that work internationally, whether that's in the UK, Hong Kong, Africa, wherever their businesses happen to be. That's really a big challenge because there is a lack of knowledge. Either just driven because people are so internally focused and they've grown more by accident than design, or they just haven't been able to understand some of the changes. Because entrepreneurs, they don't know about tax. They don't know, you know, there's all these day-to-day things they aren't aware of, and they don't need to know, but there are people out there who can help them do that. And that's really where we see as a big challenge, is on the external factors, which adds to what you were saying.
Can I jump back in? The other one that I want to talk about is the concept of agility versus momentum. So every business has momentum because they've been around for a long time. So they could say, look, we've got the inertia to be able to build on our strengths and scale just by virtue of how long they've been around. But then you have this emerging trend of being agile and being responsive to market trends. And that's, I think, where a lot of them start to fumble because they go, no, we'll just plow right through. And then you've got this alternative school of thought which goes, no, well, that's good, but you need to rethink the steps that you take in the short term to be able to figure out what happens in the long term. That level of thinking at the top, where the reins are still sort of held on strongly, does not exist. And that's something I've seen firsthand quite a few times.
For sure, me too as well. That kind of market responsiveness, I would say, is definitely lacking here in the region, but it is a core competency of companies that last hundreds of years. So Ari de Geus, his study, I think it was 2002, 2003, he studied 30 companies that had lasted more than 100 years for common competencies. And one of the core competencies of long-lasting companies is market responsiveness. So that agility has been around, and that's the reason for the success of large family companies over a generation, over several generations. But it's also one of the reasons for the demise. The lack of agility is one of the reasons for the demise of 85% of family companies.
So basically, innovation is a big issue.
Yes.
So in a family business, you have
A legacy business.
that's been built by the founder and has propelled this family into its future. But typically, there's an influx at the 3rd generation because the 2nd generation oftentimes follows in the founder's footsteps. They're educated externally, they come in with a lot of professional experience, and they excel at what the business is doing. When the 3rd generation steps in, they've got a very different outlook on life. Very different from the founder because the generations have passed on. And because it's a legacy business, they don't necessarily relate to it. It could be, let's say, a textile business or a steel business. And the young guy is saying, I want to go into tech. And that agility, and that if that is not allowed within the spectrum of the family mindset, will allow that collapse to happen unless you harness that and you regenerate the entire business and launch into a new area.
And I just want to add, you know, the sort of uniqueness of this is you have business or multiple businesses and the family. They are 2 separate things, but actually they're the same thing. And the drivers and the dynamics and the goals of the family can often, and when you go next generation on, you know, the millennial coming in, can actually contradict the way the businesses have been run in a good or a bad way. It just depends. So it's not like you often look at family business and say, well, they're a big conglomerate or a large employer, so let's focus this as you would any normal consulting into a corporate or so. But actually, when there's the family dynamic, that changes the approach completely. And I think that's a big challenge, is getting people to understand, right, we're a family, we're driving it, how are we influencing this, and what are the drivers going to change? How are they going to change with different family members coming in? Because at the end of the day, you've got employees in the company who are going to be impacted by this. And that's really it, is there that longer term thinking, as I mentioned at the beginning? What is the plan? What's the impact of the change on our businesses, on our environment, on our country, those sorts of things?
Sorry, one thing if I may. So I think the key, yes, is innovation, but I often think in this region we're sort of drinking our Kool-Aid a little bit too much. So, the problem isn't innovation. The problem is learning when to switch it off, because there isn't the possibility of scale if you don't stop innovating. You innovate, figure out this is what I'm going to scale, switch it off, and then scale. And that's where a lot of these family businesses, they allow the next generation, the millennial, to say, I'm gonna down a couple of $1 million here. You go do your thing, and then when you're done, come back and join the business. But what happens there is that millennial, the custodian of the brand, the family brand, continues to innovate and innovate and innovate and innovate. And this is where you're now starting to see, after a 10-year cycle, that there is nothing coming out the other end. In order to scale, you've got to stop innovating. And I think this is something that fundamentally people here just have not grasped within the family dynamic.
Sure. I think a lot of that just comes down to a lack of experience in the second and third generation leaders. Let's just put it on the table. We're handing these massive companies with thousands of employees over to people that just can't run them yet. They don't have the market experience. They may have the education, but they haven't actually been tested in terms of management, and they're not capable of doing it, and they're not, because of the honor and shame culture that we work in, they're not able to admit, or it would be considered shameful for them to say, hey, listen, I just don't feel like I can run this. I did an amazing second generation transition. A few years ago. It was brilliant. First generation founder, had built the company up over 30 years, passed away. Alirhamo, his son, took over the company. Now his son, he was not passionate about the industry, and he wasn't experienced enough to actually run the company. But he wasn't, because he's the head of the family, he's not able to admit that. He's not able to get up and say, hey guys, I'm not supposed to run this company because I can't do it as well as dad did. Because the responsibility is on him, and the responsibility is so great, it's much bigger than a company. It's not just the 500 employees and their families that will pay if the company goes down. If the company goes down, it's like burying dad again, right? The sense of responsibility is, this is legacy, this is the part of dad that he was always at the company. I was raised at the company. I spent my time in those hallways. I spent my time with those people while I was a kid. He was building that up for me. And if I don't keep it going, then it's like having another funeral for dad. Like, that's a huge amount of pressure for somebody who's not passionate and not competent and knows it.
So may I respond to that?
Yeah,
Take the
please.
first crack at it, and then we'll get the experts in.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. I think you got that wrong. Let the expert take a crack, and then we'll tag along.
Look, there is no such thing as a dream person. There's only something called a dream team. And it doesn't matter whether you're Richard Branson, whether you're Warren Buffett. They may be the ambassador name, but they themselves as an individual haven't created the success entirely on their own. They've had a team of people around them. I think what one needs to recognize is we have to look at the natural talents and strengths of individuals within the family and place those family members in places where they thrive and they excel within the family business structure, and let them loose. And where there's a gap, we need to hire external professionals. Now, we've had a similar situation where we had two family members, a father and a son, and the son wasn't particularly competent to take over. It's kind of a similar situation. And what we did there is we had to actually train up an entire team around the son and support him. So it was the process, it took time, but we had to slowly build up his confidence, educate him in different parts of the business, but we all understood that it was the team around him that was going to carry the business forward.
I think we've seen this happen also within the political organizations that exist in the region that we
Yeah.
operate out of. That is true. You can't get. It's very rare to have 3 generations of exceptional leaders.
Yeah.
So you have to cultivate them. But I think there's one other emerging sort of challenge that I see, which is that you don't grasp the market the same way as the founder, because they were able to plug a gap that they saw in front of them, and they were able to say that I will help define this region by creating the right supply for the right demand.
Yeah.
By the time it dilutes to the next generation, it's no longer a family business, it's a business.
Yeah.
And I start to see that the word family as a prefix to family business is really used as a way to indemnify yourself from large scale screw ups, right? So I think if we get past that, and say, look, we're a business. It just so happens to be a family business, or it just so happens that we're a family. It's something that we've got to embrace a little bit more, because you can't just hide behind that tag very long. It's not, if it was a regular business and you had that much family, it'd be called nepotism. But
That's right.
we allow ourselves that because we're branded a family business.
Fair.
Second, you've got to think of the family as a brand that is separate from the organization as a brand. And you've got to learn to leverage the family brand when you need it, and you've got to leverage the organizational brand when you need it. Often it's one and the same thing here, and that's a huge challenge, because one will take the other down.
Yes. Gary?
I mean, just to add to that, the only thing to bear in mind is it's just constantly evolving and changing. You talked at the beginning there, Asin, about the family, and you put a structure in place, you put that team around, but it's not then finished. It's then continually changing and evolving, and as we all know, it all changes much quicker than it ever has before. So, go back to your point about being innovative, trying new things, you can change everything very, very quickly. So it's almost quite often putting the brakes on things and say, right, let's just stick to the knitting, let's do what we're strong at, and then grow and develop over time. It's not all going to be in 3 years we're going to have this massive new business. Right. It is about having the structures and the brakes on the individual who's come in, who's learning to be competent, and it is controlling that part of it. Because we're in a very entrepreneurial, fast-paced, innovative, world-leading environment in Dubai. People have been brought up through that education of that's what is expected and that's what they want to do. But there's a counterweight to that, because you could head off very quickly and fall off a cliff. So these are the things to be conscious of as you go. Yeah.
Just to add one quick point to Danish, it was a very interesting point you brought up there, and I appreciate it. But generally in a business, you have a switch in life cycle. It starts off as a business family, where it's business first. And it's all about the business, where the founder doesn't show up at home till 11 at night because he's working.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't have a watch, and it's all about the business. It's called a business family. But there needs to come a point in the cycle, in the life of this business, where it becomes a family business, where it switches.
Love that.
Where the family becomes the uniting force.
Yeah.
Because you see, look, reality is businesses come and go.
Yeah.
No business survives forever. It has a life cycle. If your family is completely behind the business and that business disappears, where does it leave the family? Whereas if your definition changes to it's a family first, and our tagline in our business is one family, one legacy. Because it's all about the family. Once you get the family right, you get the structure right, you get the unity right, you can plug the business in and out, and the family remains intact.
That's really helpful. And I think this plays into exactly what you were saying, Danish, about insulating the family from the business and insulating the business from the family. I think that idea of one brand taking down the other brand is really powerful. We've all seen that, right? We've all seen companies take down families, and we've all seen families take down their companies that they were supposed to inherit. It was supposed to become this beautiful legacy, but because of infighting and squabbles over shares and squabbles over leadership, they've actually lost. And there's a massive impact, not just on the family, but then on all of the families that were impacted by those.
I've seen families take down presidencies.
Yes, that's true.
Need I say any more?
Yeah, exactly.
But can I make one point though? I think when we talk about family businesses here, in this region, we have what I call the trader hangover. So we built the largest empires in this region as traders. We took commodity A, put a margin on it, and became exclusive to the region, right? So if you look at the largest families that are operating currently, they're all traders. And so to shift from that to service-based or intellectual property-driven businesses
Yeah.
has been such a huge challenge. And I've
Yeah.
seen a tiny single-digit percentages of
Yeah.
businesses that succeed that are not commodity trader-based or real estate-based. So real estate to me is just another form of trading.
Yeah.
But so that's something that you need to get out of to be able to talk about what is sustainable in the future. Because you can't do the single agency model
Right.
sustainably for the next 10 years. You cannot do that to keep this region competitive. So that's going to change, which means a lot of people who have been comfortable for 30 or 40 or 50 years
Yeah.
are no longer in that comfort zone. They
Okay.
do not have that protection.
Couldn't
So
agree.
then let's get practical. Okay, we're talking to family businesses, traders, traditionally now making the transition from maybe second to third generation leadership. What do they need to know, and what kinds of decisions do they need to make in order to make that transition effective, and maybe take advantage of these new opportunities in the market?
Sure.
Go ahead.
May I? Okay, so I think there's three things. Number one, you've got to deal with how do you upgrade your legacy? And I use this quite loosely. And this involves both a cultural shift as well as a technological shift.
Yeah.
I think technology today is used as an analogy for a barrier within these large organizations when it's exactly the opposite. It should help you create a frictionless environment which gives you more data, which allows decision makers to make better decisions
Sure.
and measure its success. Family businesses are not oriented around data, they're oriented around gut. I think this is the first thing that has to shift. You've got to follow your heart, but take your brain with you, as I like to say. This is something that's big. It's actionable.
Yeah, it's good.
Number two is a new culture of working. We talked about the agility.
Yeah.
We talked about creating silos for experimentation. And so this is the one time where silos are a good thing, and we don't embrace them enough. Create that little sandbox.
Yeah.
Allow the experimentation to happen. If it fails, make sure it fails fast so you can then pivot and start trying something else without having to rethink your entire business.
Yeah.
Going back to the tech, a lot of times the tech approach to business is let's go and do a startup. Let's try and build an Uber for tomato delivery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whatever, just something quite random. But the real opportunity is if family businesses are diversified enough, they have an opportunity to take a piece of tech, like blockchain or AI, they're emerging, you've got government mandates sort of ensuring that this becomes a reality, to be able to say, let's test bed this across our own organization. If we get it right, I have a captive market of the 1.3 trillion that's passing along to the next generation. They're under 40 years old.
Right.
So, and they understand tech as natives. So I think this is the second thing. And the third is understand that consumer demands have changed completely, regardless of whether you're a B2B business or a B2C business or a B2B2C business, right? Consumer demands and expectations have changed. You are no longer competing with local competitors. Your competition is everybody, anywhere, anytime.
That's right.
And we don't think about that enough. We still think, well, we're from the UAE, we're a local company, so therefore we will generate business by virtue of being patriotic.
Yeah.
I don't think those days are going to last very long.
Gary, what's your input?
Agree with what you're saying, but as I mentioned at the beginning, we look at it from an asset protection, the longevity.
Yeah.
So going back to your point, what do you need to know?
That's right.
Is to ask that question. So quite often we find the instigation point is when the patriarch is 80 years old and suddenly starts thinking, well, what's going to happen when I pass on?
Yeah.
And that's the only time it starts looking at as you've touched on, moving into this family legacy and developing, etc. But it's really about starting that very early on, and quite often people have avoided those discussions for cultural reasons, or they've got 8 children and not quite sure how to share that money out. There's the Sharia law piece as well, and they'll have assets overseas which wouldn't necessarily fall under Sharia law. So it's really getting an understanding of their long-term intentions for the next generation and the generation beyond that.
Yeah.
What is it we're trying to build? Yes, the consumer demand's changing, anticipated as much as you possibly can. Tech comes in, but just stepping back and saying, actually what we don't want to do is lose all our assets, or 50% of our assets over time. We want to protect those. So how are we going to do that? What structures are we going to put in place? What do we need to know? Who do we need to bring in? Where's the skill sets that we're lacking? Who's going to direct us and say, this is what you need to do, and then you protect that legacy because there's something to hand over. There's quite often, we've been in positions where, again, multiple families, and there's infighting amongst those families, and that chews up lawyers' fees for years, and then those assets gradually just depreciate into having much less than was originally anticipated. And quite often, the next generation actually aren't aware of the size of the wealth that's coming down. And that may be because the patriarch is doing that on purpose, because it's very easy culturally to say, actually, I know I'm going to get X million, so I'm just going to cruise through life. And we know that's a reality. That's what happens. And, you know, it may be the fourth son or the daughter is the real entrepreneur with the competencies to take that in. So how do you structure your business? How do you have those conversations within the family? Because they're very, very difficult to have. For the patriarch to open this up and say, do you know what, you're the eldest son, but you're not competent to do this yet. You know, that could be the discussion, and I may as patriarch think you're never going to be competent. But having that discussion with the family to turn around and say, actually, the daughter's going to inherit most of it, or whatever it may be. So those are the things we look at: is what's the longevity? What are you passing on, and how are you going to do it?
Asin, you have experience in this.
Well, you know, if we're talking specifically about the trading industry, which is what I believe the question was, we've dealt with a number of families here who are all in the trading space.
Yeah.
And I'm sad to say this, but virtually every one of them is bleeding in the current situation. And they're finding it very, very, very tough. Sure. I think what we said here had a lot of relevance. It's a shift of mindset completely. The millennials think totally differently from the founders. Yeah. I mean, you have situations where the founders have this rigor of showing up to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and being there till 5 o'clock.
Yeah, yeah.
And the next gen guy walks in and he says, but everyone's just sitting on their laptops doing work. Why do I have to do this here? I should be at Starbucks doing the same thing, right? Yeah. It's a shift. Now, if you're not allowing them the freedom to operate, you're going to suffocate and you're not going to allow that transition to happen, that growth to happen. Evolve away from the trading mentality into something new. Similarly, again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. Getting stuck in that legacy, as you just spoke about, is critical to get the family out of this rut. And this trading mentality, sadly, the short in and out flipping is no longer here to stay.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
Some really excellent conversation pieces for family businesses, and I hope that all of our family businesses that are watching get in touch with you guys to do that, get in touch with myself to try and answer these difficult questions. Final thoughts, you guys, on family business?
I'll wrap up very quickly. Vision, get it straight. Values, we haven't spoken about values today.
I know.
But that is one of the most critical aspects to hold a family together. Policies and structures of how the rules around the family and the governance of the family. But we're families. And the other thing we've got to deal with is the emotion side of things. Because the emotions derail everything else.
Yep.
So one of the areas we've got to really focus on at some point in the future is figure out family values and family emotions.
Perfect. Danish?
I don't want to summarize everything that we've already spoken about, so I'll just bring a fresh thought to the table. I think the concept of a majlis is such an intrinsically Arabic tradition, and we don't embrace it well enough. I know a 7th-generation business here, where the 3rd-generation entrepreneur is still very much leading the charge, makes it a point to have a cross-generational majlis every so often, to be able to brutally have these very honest conversations, to be able to determine amongst themselves, with the support of each other, what the next steps need to be, both from a vision perspective, but also from a pressing priorities. And I think this is extraordinary. We must embrace and go back home and learn from what has worked well.
Excellent. Gary?
And just bring up, the successful families I've seen and worked with have that family council, which actually starts it off, and every year they meet, facilitated by an external person who has no agenda, because it gets messy. And you want it to get messy. The facilitator's job is to encourage the emotions to come out, to have the discussions, because that's healthy. When you've got it out, then the family can make decisions. And linked to that, it's really the patriarch in most instances, but the matriarch as well, to be able to let go. They've run this business for decades, it's worked, they've been successful, but it's a different world. And they need to be able to say, right, okay, I'm going to pass it over. You have my trust. I may not agree with the way you're going to do this, but I'm passing it over and let go. Not step back in 3 months later because they haven't done it the way you thought it should be done. So that's really critical things for me. Family council and let it go.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. I believe that business is personal and family business is extremely personal. Thank you for being here. Have a good day.